Welcome to the viewers at home. We're starting a little bit late, but you can catch up in the notes on the screen. Right. Sorry, Victor.
Yeah, so this data is data that is created essentially by your code in the Crowbar framework. It's used for things, and that is actually more what you would use for default settings that are settings in the absence of being overridden by the end user.
So, like, the password is sort of in a hybrid from that.
Every time we smash all those together to create an attribute set, they're put together in such an order that user data always takes precedence over this data, and this data always takes precedence over the wall.
Okay, so let me put the precedent. So what you're saying is, if you wanted to create default passwords, put them in sysdata, the user could then override them, both settings would be in place, and it would pick up the defaults. Okay.
Yeah.
So precedence is user
Precedence
greater than system data greater than wall.
I believe so. User data greater than sysdata or wall, and I don't remember exactly which one has high priority in the case of the conflict between sysdata and the wall. And the wall is data that we get back from a jig run.
So system data is basically what we used to call the outbound data from CV to node, right? And wall is inbound data. From jig. Yeah. And then this is user. Okay, so this is config data. So this is from user to CV. Okay.
And the format of all of these is just JSON blobs, right?
They're all stored as JSON blobs.
Yeah, they're all stored as JSON blobs.
Cool, great. Thank you very much. That really helped.
So you don't actually merge. I thought we merged the return result from the jig back into the system data, but we don't. We keep it separate.
We keep it
so
separate.
It's very clear.
Yeah.
Where you're okay, and but then so data and data presented to a run is merged based on precedence.
Yeah. It's a combination of precedence and positioning the overall graph.
Right. So there's a parent data is weaker than child data type of thing, effectively.
Yeah.
What yourself is greater than your parent. Okay.
Pretty much.
Cool. Chris, sorry we went a little over. Does that clarify the question?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a great explanation. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we do the call. Okay.
And yeah, sorry I got to jump early, but I have to swap over to the stand-up call.
I understand. I hear I'm starting it up. Give my apologies for missing it, please.
Okay, talk to you guys later.
That was a short interlude. John, I think you're the only one on the call outside, because Chris dropped off and we lost him.
Yay! Well, we actually have Steve Friday and Keith Rushford. Keith Rutherford from Rushford.
Well, then I'm happy to trundle on. We identified one topic that Chris brought up. I think we made some nice notes about the different types of data that Node will store, and then the thing I was going to cover next was just a plan for the transition to OpenCrowbar, and then some discussion about the progress that Victor's made design-wise on the Docker admin node.
Awesome. Actually, I'd love for you guys to see this if you're interested in what's going on with Crowbar, because they were asking, what's going on with Crowbar? I'll just send you the document. We'll present it on Switch. Oh, yeah, that's good.
It's useful information for us to.
So I spent 3 hours with someone yesterday
Mm-hmm.
Who wanted to get fired up with Crowbar. Wants to write some set.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I introduced him to the Crowbar 1 stuff, and it drove his head into a complete tailspin.
Yeah.
Then I showed him the OpenCrowbar stuff and how we can just use the GitHub web interface for pretty well everything, other than just pushing the patches up.
Right.
But when I went to the OpenCrowbar website, it still points to all the old info and doesn't have any OpenCrowbar.org info on it yet. So we need to rectify that.
So there's a couple of things on that. So one of the things for OpenCrowbar is use GitHub pull request process.
Yeah, and we need to document that workflow.
Right. No, that makes sense. The sooner we do that, the better. Actually, what I would say we're going to do is move away from the crowbar.github.io site and use the opencrowbar.org pointed to the wiki. There's a wiki. We have a wiki, so the landing page for OpenCrowbar should be home page on the wiki.
Yes, that's right. So what we need to put on there pretty well straight up is a workflow overview, how to get started, a workflow, and design documentation.
Workflow for what?
Okay, I'm a developer. I've now downloaded the repo. I've made some changes. What do I do with it?
So, workflow for contribution and design documentation?
Yeah, design documentation.
And those, all three of those things are going to show up in the core/docs area.
Yeah, and that should be published as well.
Mm-hmm. It just needs to be linked over.
Yeah.
Okay, and then one of the other things is that we needed to have a workable process for developed devs to create a multi-node system.
Yeah.
And actually, devs and test.
Correct.
To create a workable multi-node system. So this is VMs for now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So these are all. We're going to start. Go ahead.
There's another top-level issue, and that is, okay, I'm into OpenCrowbar now. How do I build a product and use it? That's the way the question's being framed by the gentleman yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Build output and product. So this is actually, hey, I want to take it into the field. This I would say this is something that we have to solve over time. I would not call this a blocking issue. For the migration to OpenCrowbar.
No, not for the migration, but in terms of someone who wants to test drive it, we do need to help them on their way there.
I totally agree.
Okay, we need one under the design documentation. That's a sub-bullet of that. We also need to document our architecture for build tools, the philosophy, and their use.
Okay, John, you're adding a prerequisite that I think is a community discussion for this.
I'm throwing that open for input.
Okay.
How that should be done.
Okay.
You may want to, I don't know where you would put that, describe the layout of workload add-ons to the Crowbar.
Oh, yeah, we have to resolve.
We haven't really started to address that. So, for example, I want to create a whole new workload. Where do I put it? Do I put it in the core, or do I put it somewhere else?
Okay. We have that issue.
And of course, then how do I integrate the two?
I think those are resolvable. I'm not sure that's blocking either.
Not blocking at all.
So these are really things, I like to capture these because they're things that I want to tick off and make sure that we resolve in our discussions on this, but this is really something that we have to have a mailing list discussion on.
So that's 100,000-foot level picture of what is needed.
Yeah.
The devil is in some of the details there.
At some point, we need the devil is in the commitment to do the migration, because the
devil is in the migration, but there are assumptions that details have been worked out where, in fact, what we have is very much more flexible than people imagine, and the barrier to migration is actually far lower than the intellectual perception of that barrier.
Yes. So along those lines, I was going to transition us to the next topic, and I'd love to spend the next 20 minutes talking about what the Docker, and you only have 5. That's fine. Some of this is capturing notes from discussions we've had around how this works, and I was hoping to go through this, and then I'm hoping today to actually replicate Victor's experience with this, produce a recording, and allow people to start replicating the experience. So my goal is a recording showing OCB, OpenCrowbar, admin in Docker, able to boot up nodes. It's really boot, manage VMs machine.
That won't happen.
It won't happen ever, or it won't happen?
It won't happen today.
Okay,
No
that's fine.
sledgehammer.
You've reinstalled your laptop. Did you put the same OS on that you've had? The reason I ask is that if you're going to put Docker on that, I'd like to follow you.
I did Ubuntu 12.04.3. I have a CentOS one too, but that was not it was fast. So I'm trying to get all the steps. What if we started from a VM with an OS on it?
I haven't worked out how to do that yet.
Good answer. What if I started from a Docker container? Let's talk about this and see where we stand. So do you want to lay out the high level?
The high level blocking thing right now is that you don't know how to build the sledgehammer. In the OpenCrowbar stuff.
All right. Let's build up to that, David.
And for various still areas where even haven't fully debugged. You can't build flush memory of a Docker container.
Okay. All right, so let's step backwards and describe what you've been doing in a more general sense. So what's the objective? What the Docker stuff has been, the Docker OCD?
The objective, from my point of view, is to enable a minimal time path for getting to something that you can use in a development environment as a working Crowbar admin has.
What does working mean?
It means you can VMs or physical machines, as long as they are tied to the Docker bridge, and manage them. Go through their normal discovery installation cycle.
There was another design choice that you made in this with the Chef Solo, which I think was important. You want to explain what you did with Chef Solo from that perspective?
I don't quite get what
You get what I'm at? So you made a choice to have use Chef Solo to do the install inside the container. You didn't just create a container.
Yes, okay. So I do all the initial bootstrapping of the Crowbar web UI, getting all the components in place, and all the prerequisites you need to actually run the Crowbar web UI and the Crowbar web services as a Chef Solo recipe. I did that primarily because Chef is pretty well suited to doing this sort of thing. And it was either that or maintain another longish set of shell scripts.
Instead of creating a canned Docker environment, what you're doing is you're running Chef Solo. It's called Bootstrap, right?
Yeah.
Inside the environment to do all the setup.
Mm-hmm. And because Chef is idempotent, I can take the output of that bootstrapping process and commit it as its own container and upload that, and that gives people a base to start from. We refine it, we can just Docker containers and use those.
So the reason why that's faster is because what you're basically doing is all of the downloads are now being skipped because they're in the container. But if you change the Chef script, which is outside, so the Chef script is outside the container.
No, it's inside the container.
Isn't it sourced outside? So if you change the Chef script.
I started off with
Okay.
bare bones Ubuntu and CentOS images.
Okay.
And then I wrote the Chef Solo, the bootstrapping script, ran it, and that installed all the prerequisites that you need to run the Crowbar web UI, and then I committed that as a new container.
But I thought all the code was outside the container.
It's outside the container, but it all runs in the context of it all runs inside the container. Not really, no.
Docker is like Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? So this is why I was thinking that if you check in a change to Bootstrap and somebody restarts their container, it's going to automatically fix itself to match the latest Bootstrap, right? Okay. Able to be made even if you have an existing container. Can the Bootstrap be used outside of Docker?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Bootstrap doesn't care what environment it's running in. The idea is that you can also use it in virtual machines or on physical hardware to or admin container from essentially just a get checked out of OpenCrowbar 4.
that make it effectively an installation process?
Mm-hmm.
Really excited about with this is that means that the developers are using the same install that you would do for a production installation, right?
That's the idea. With OpenCrowbar, we'll actually be able to use the methodology that I wanted to establish for the old Crowbar code.
So this is why I think this is a really powerful story. Right? We're using Docker to create a clean environment so that every time we spin up a dev environment, we are effectively using the same setup as a production environment, which is really what Docker is all about. So how big is the gap between what you have working in Bootstrap today and actually just installing it on VM? So check out the code. Don't use it in Docker, but run Bootstrap, assuming we documented it.
Assuming you do just a minimal OS installation and that virtual machine has connectivity to the internet, that should be all it takes. It should go to Bootstrap itself and the functionality from there.
So but there's connectivity to the internet, right?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Cool. I submitted a patch on Ubuntu for getting DHCP running. Victor, did you take that or did you see any or encounter any issues like that?
Was that against the OpenCrowbar or the old Crowbar code bases?
Open. I don't mess with the old Crowbar anymore.
Okay, because I did see a patch for dicking around with AppArmor against the old Crowbar code base.
Oh, I might be mistaken. I think it was before I switched. Never mind. Never mind.
But I haven't taken it because when running inside of Docker, that's not the only thing that keeps DHCP from running anyways.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
The other thing that keeps DHCP from running, which is actually a much bigger showstopper, is that you can't run Upstart and directly Upstart managed services inside of a Docker container.
But you can use supervised D.
I have this thing about wanting to use the exact same code path inside of Docker and outside whenever I'm bootstrapping admin nodes. It's a personal quirk.
No, I understand why you would want to do that. I totally agree.
Yeah.
The supervisor D pattern is more for just one service per container, while in the Crowbar admin we have multiple services per container.
Right. The thing is that CentOS 6 is still stupid enough so that all of the System 5 and stuff is still in place, and all of that works just fine for running multiple services inside of the container that turns into the admin node. So, and that leaves us with the drawback that right now we can't control the DNS environment that the admin node uses.
But you can with the DNS switch into Docker. And
that works. That only partially does what we want.
Okay.
All right, I'll back up a second because you guys are deep in Docker and I'm not following. DNS switch in Docker?
Yeah, the Docker service that controls all the containers has a switch-DNS where you can indicate an IP address of your DNS server. And then Docker run has a switch that can indicate the host name of your individual containers. And I believe you can also supply each individual container a DNS IP address.
That doesn't necessarily help you when you're trying to run a DNS server inside of a Docker container and you want everything to use that DNS server.
You would need a self-referential reconfiguration of Docker.
Yeah. Or which I believe is what they, or what I believe they're going to do in Docker 0.8 is change how they manage the resolve comp hosts and hostname files to make them just regular files that we can overwrite inside the container, and that solves that problem.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't able to find a roadmap for Docker. Is it on the mailing list?
I have no idea. I found it when I was Googling for how do I change resolve.conf in Docker, and poked around in the different issues that mentioned that.
You have to go to their funding press release, and you'll find their.
No, it's pretty legit.
I'm joking.
It's in a GitHub issue somewhere.
So, okay, we need to we'll go through and document as we repeat this process. What's going on, which I think is pretty good. Okay. Those were the items that I wanted to cover on the agenda. Are there questions about what's going on with Docker, with this process? Okay, captured the salient points from our conversation.
Yeah.
There's the other, so there is something else that I would want to document, which is where does the code come from? So for developers, they can use GitHub, right? Developers get cloned, and the directory is mapped. If I'm a developer using this method, then if I make code changes local, they're going to get picked up inside of the admin node.
Mm-hmm. I think we'll bind mount the source into the container.
Happens if when the tester
PM is completely out of scope for what I'm doing.
Yes.
No.
Why? Why don't you want to talk about it?
Because I have no idea how. I mean, there will be no making code changes outside of the context of something when you were installing it.
So I guess this is my question. If you were going to use the container,
Mm-hmm.
the RPM lays down the code just like the git clone does.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
No.
What's different?
I don't know, but I'm not making the assumption that it does, because in all the OpenCrowbar 2 stuff, it doesn't. It uses slightly different directory layouts that Bartnet installs have to take into account.
Okay. All right, so there's a TBD. That's fine. I'm asking the question.
I don't know exactly how John is handling all of this.
I suspect we can influence. And make them very similar, ideally.
Well, as operations engineer, I would like to reiterate my hatred for all package formats.
Worth discussing. So,
As long as Ruby Gems is included amongst the package formats that you hate, then I'm fine with that. Speaking of hated packaging formats, we really need to nail down what our cookbook story is going to be.
Yeah, I was actually just reviewing the latest on Berkshelf 3. Speaking of managing cookbooks, and to adequately use Berkshelf 3, it looks like you're going to need at least a copy of the chef server bit. it's going to be in the Omnibus installer. It's implemented in Ruby, so it can't run in process with the Chef server, because that's in Erlang. But it will be a hanging chad off of the installation process. It's a gem, so we could potentially just grab the gem, but then support agreement. And it's with an E.
Did you say about a support agreement?
I'm thinking that any installation process for Berkshelf itself that's more complicated than gem installed Berkshelf is a non-starter.
Right. I was thinking about distribution, though, where we're going to pick up the gem. We might have to pluck it out of Omnibus.
Who cares where we pick it up from? I mean, it's on RubyGem. It's on RubyGem.org just like everything else is. So.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. So this is not a concern.
Well, my concern is more oriented around, we're going to have a mix of cookbooks that we control directly and cookbooks and upstream cookbooks. And how are we going to account for the installation differences there? And how are we going to account for how we're going to upload them to a Chef server on demand or not, as the case may be, depending on exactly what jig we're using to implement a given role, and that sort of thing.
I'm losing you behind the typing, Victor.
Huh?
I'm sorry. The typing too loud. Hold on.
Victor, repeat it.
I just moved the microphone. Let me make sure it's actually using the microphone. I think it is. Sorry while I adjust my audio settings. It's not letting me change it. All right, I'll try and type more quietly. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my concern around cookbooks is we're going to have this mix of cookbooks that we control directly and upstream cookbooks that we're pulling from that may or may not have a staging repository in the chain of who is up in the upstream chain. And my concern is a lot more around how are we going, what method are we going to use to make sure that all the developers have the right cookbooks that they need at the right version, how we're going to package them all up, and all that sort of jazz.
Yeah, the Berks file has been robustified, and it also can handle pure Ruby. So we can write whatever we want in the Berks file, and the API server works out the dependencies, gathers all the dependencies, and provides them to us. So we can say, I want these. I want you to check GitHub first. I want you to check my local repo second, and for this regex or whatever tag of cookbooks, I want you to check me. So, we've got tremendous flexibility in the Berks file.
We need to implement that. We need to not talk about it.
Can you repeat it? Still not clear.
Oh, thank you. I'll stop typing while you talk.
We can pick up the dependency coming out of the distro, the OS distro, and then go to it's not there, and then go.
Okay. So
Yeah, we can't hear Arkady if he's talking.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, so there's the question of how we're going to manage that. There's also the question of how are we going to handle pulling in non-core or something outside OpenCrowbar core. when we need it.
That's a bar clamp issue, or?
Yes.
Okay, yes, we do, we have to resolve that.
We don't have that tooling in place, and we're going to need it very quickly if we're going to talk about transitioning over to OpenCrowbar from the Crowbar order repos.
Actually, that's actually in the earlier conversation, yes.
Because right now, Wayne and Regini and all of them have been doing all their work in the Crowbar 1 repo structure because they can spin up an admin node and fool around with it that way.
I understand. That's why we need to have admin nodes.
Well, it's not that we need to have admin nodes. That's only part of it, especially the easier part. The harder part is we need the tooling in the OpenCrowbar repo system to handle the analogous tasks that we already handle fine via the dev tool in the Crowbar repository. Making sure that we have all of the appropriate workload repos cloned properly, making sure that the workload repos are tied into core for whenever we are setting up an admin server, making sure that, if we're going to be using Berkshelf, we'll have to make sure that the Berks files that are used in the workload repositories refer back to the Berks file in core to make sure that, so that we don't have unnecessary duplication of cookbooks, and so on and so forth.
Would we have used Berkshelf to pull down the core recipes also and allow those to be more dynamic? So you have your static ones that you could also go out and pick up as an upgrade model? I guess it's an upgrade. Okay, that's fine to resolve.
And then we get to the kind of what I consider to be the driver, or the thing that will potentially cause the most explosion in the number of repositories that we have in the OpenCrowbar. Where are we going to store Crowbar-specific repositories or Crowbar-specific forks of upstream cookbooks?
Question? All reasonable questions to get answered.
Considering it's not so much that we're going to get answers for them, it's that I'm going to answer them in terms of code. I need to.
So is there a practical alternative? I'm spitballing with this a little bit, but since we talked about it for 10 minutes, is there a practical alternative to Berkshelf?
No.
What are the alternatives? So let's actually see if we can come up with something as an alternative. So the number one alternative is just copying the code, right?
Okay.
I hate that.
I'm not arguing. I'm just trying to make sure we have reasonable alternatives.
The other alternative is just the custom script that handles cloning all of our repositories for us. Pulling them in and get submodules or get subtrees. Both options I hate for various reasons.
There's Librarian, which has no central dependency resolver that Berkshelf does.
Do we have to know or care about dependency resolution along those lines?
It's centralized, no centralized dependency resolver.
Guys, I mean, we are talking about the chef-specific thing. If we're going to support not just chef, but let's say Puppet or something else, how are we going to resolve the things across the different things? Or what is the mechanism, or we have a completely separate mechanism for each of the tool set?
If a tool set comes with a mechanism, we use it. That's the way I would go. Unless it's awful, and then we have to re-implement.
I don't know the mechanism across the different tools that will not collide.
This raises a question. Is the Berkshelf, assuming Berkshelf is the answer, is Berkshelf managed by the jig or by Crowbar?
It's used by by the developer and by yeah, well, it would be used primarily by the chef jig to get any jig, any roles that require the chef jig.
Well, would it be used by the chef jig? I mean, until very recently, the chef jig, the chef jig has always just gotten away with being able to nice cookbook upload anything that isn't already uploaded. The chef jig is relied on Knife and not on Berkshelf or anything like that, because none of our cookbooks have been managed by Berkshelf.
Yeah, but Berkshelf doesn't molest the cookbooks. Correct.
Berkshelf doesn't what?
Molest cookbooks.
They don't change the cookbook, but each cookbook has their own Berkshelf which defines everything. So.
Well, no, not all Berkshelf, not all cookbooks have their own Berkshelf. Most of them don't.
No. Well, all of the upstream cookbooks have their own Berkshelf file, which will be what we planning to use to control the environment as we are putting the wrappers around.
No. What you're seeing in the upstream cookbooks are the Berks files that are controlling all the cookbooks within any product.
We're not going to mess with that stuff.
Yeah, we're not controlling the cookbook itself.
Right. So we're not answering. I'm trying to answer Arkadi's question by saying it's the jig's responsibility to handle this, not Crowbar.
It's mainly going to be the developer's responsibility to handle it and Crowbar's responsibility. Because what I'm thinking of is more along the lines of how, where, and when are we going to ensure that all of our cookbooks are cloned properly onto the developer's system and make sure that when we start having multiple branches in the workload repositories, how are we going to handle making sure that we're using the right versions of the cookbooks for those branches and so on and so forth. The logistics of making sure that the cookbooks that we need to have on the chef server get uploaded to the chef server, that is something that I already know how to solve with Knife, so I don't really care about Berkshelf for that purpose.
Yeah, Berkshelf and Knife are merging in a lot of aspects.
Well, that's awesome, as long as there's still a Knife command, though.
Because they've been replicating some features.
Makes sense. So you're saying in the jig would just use Knife from that perspective?
Well,
so wait, how does you do a deployment of OpenStack? Berkshelf pulls in does it pull in the cookbooks at build time, or does it pull them in at deploy time?
Build time. It has to pull them in at build time.
So there's a tooling requirement for the OpenStack RPM that says...
There's a tooling requirement for Crowbar.
Okay. There's a tooling requirement for
that
Crowbar.
Says we know how to pull in all of the cookbooks we will require.
Okay. And you had at one point suggested that we should separate the cookbooks that Crowbar uses out of the Crowbar repos and store them and life cycle them separately. Is that still? Would you still make that statement? No, I don't think.
For some of the cookbooks, yes.
Like which ones?
The ones that are basically clones with a bunch of Crowbar-specific hacks to upstream cookbooks.
Okay. Right. So that you're right. So something that sets up the Apache server, you would want to use Berkshelf for the Apache server cookbook rather than maintain our own fork. So there are upstreams. Right. Those we already have. They're not even forked. They're basically copied.
So Berkshelf.
And so they're not. It's not urgent, but it's definitely something we should keep in mind.
Well, Berkshelf helps you manage those dependencies when you have your own wrapper cookbooks or side-by-side cookbooks to upstream cookbooks. That's where Berkshelf is magical.
That makes sense. Okay. We're out of time. I really think that this was useful. It was useful for me. I hope it was useful for other people. I agree with your sense of urgency on addressing this, Victor. I think that if we can actually demonstrate, like I believe Victor can, the basics of getting an admin node working in OpenCrowbar, we could then, this is going to put a lot of pressure on addressing this question and how we bring in the workloads question. And I believe that doing this inside of the dev tool would be much harder than doing it just inside of a blank slate environment. But maybe I'm wrong. All right. Since I'll take the last word on that one.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Very good discussion.
Cool. I like getting things written down. I think it helps propagate knowledge.
It does, absolutely.
So what I'll do is I'll send these notes out onto the community list. Or Judd, if you want to do that, are you in a place to do that? Let me do it. I ran the call, so I'll send out the notes from the board.
These are great notes. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you for participating. I love seeing the type. Gives me something to do with my fingers. All right, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day.
I'm going to start the next call.
Yep.